I'm Brent, 36 years old, and I've spent 12 years building my investment firm while my family thought I was just playing around online. At our monthly dinner, my sister Abigail smirked across the table. "Stop playing pretend entrepreneur," she announced loudly. "Your little online thing isn't a real business." Everyone laughed while I nodded quietly. Understood. They had no idea what Monday would bring. Before I share how this family dinner changed everything, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had your success doubted by those closest to you. Growing up in our suburban Chicago home, I was always the odd one out. In a family of loud, charismatic extroverts, I was the quiet, analytical child who preferred computers to conversations. My sister Abigail, 2 years younger, commanded attention in every room since childhood. She had that magnetic personality that drew people in, making her the star at school events, family gatherings, and eventually in her professional life. Our younger brother Mason fell somewhere in between, sociable enough to fit in but lacking Abigail's dominant presence. Our parents, Harold and Margaret Wilson, built their lives around a small chain of local hardware stores. They embodied traditional American small business values: customer service, community involvement, and visible hard work. Success in their eyes meant a storefront people could walk into, employees you could see working, and customers you greeted by name. This tangible definition of business shaped their perception of what legitimate success looked like. When I developed an interest in technology and online investments during my college years, my family viewed it as a phase, something to entertain me until I found a real career. I can still remember my father's well-intentioned guidance during my sophomore year at Northwestern. "Computers are fine as a hobby, Brent," he said while helping me move into my dorm room. "But remember, people trust businesses they can see and touch. This internet stuff is just a fad for most folks." I nodded respectfully, but continued pursuing my interests in digital finance and emerging tech markets. While completing my business degree, I started small, investing the $5,000 I had saved from summer jobs into promising tech startups. By graduation, I had tripled that investment, but even then my family saw it as lucky gambling rather than calculated strategy. Rather than fight for validation, I made a decision that would shape the next decade. I would build my success quietly, without seeking their approval. This wasn't out of spite, but self-preservation. Defending my choices at every family gathering drained energy I needed for building my business. Our monthly family dinners became an exercise in deflection. While Abigail shared dramatic stories from her marketing career at a cosmetics company, and Mason discussed his teaching position, I offered vague comments about working on some interesting projects online. My parents would exchange knowing glances, assuming I was still figuring life out, but they loved me enough not to push too hard. Meanwhile, I was methodically building an investment firm specializing in tech startups with sustainable business models. Each year, my client list grew longer, my portfolio stronger, and my network wider. But at family dinners, I remained Brent with his computer hobby. 3 years ago, Abigail announced she was leaving her marketing job to found a tech startup. Despite having minimal technical knowledge, she had convinced a group of investors that her vision for a lifestyle management platform would revolutionize the industry. My parents were ecstatic, finally having a child following an entrepreneurial path they understood, or thought they understood. "Abigail has always been a natural leader," my mother boasted at the celebration dinner they hosted. "She's got that business sense like her father." I offered genuine congratulations while mentally calculating the viability of her described business model, which seemed to ignore fundamental market realities and technical limitations. But I kept these thoughts to myself. Family dinners weren't the place for business consulting, especially when not requested. Over the next 3 years, Abigail regularly updated the family about her growing startup, new office space in downtown Chicago, 20 employees, 40 employees, a feature in a local business magazine. Each announcement received enthusiastic support from our parents, who proudly displayed the magazine in their living room and directed conversation toward her achievements whenever friends visited. Through careful compartmentalization, I maintained the separation between my professional success and family life. My penthouse apartment, the office overlooking Lake Michigan, my team of 60 investment professionals, these remained invisible to my family, who still pictured me working alone at a computer in a modest apartment, chasing digital dreams. This arrangement worked for everyone until Abigail's startup began actively seeking second-round funding. Coincidentally, around the time my investment firm had established a new $150 million fund for emerging tech companies. The collision course was set, though nobody at that family dinner table could have possibly anticipated its impact. The last Sunday in September brought perfect autumn weather as I drove to my parents' home in the suburbs. Golden leaves lined the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood, a scenic backdrop for what would become a pivotal evening in our family's history. I parked my modest sedan in the driveway. I always left my luxury vehicles at home for these visits, and grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought for dinner. The familiar scent of my mother's pot roast greeted me as I entered. Their home remained largely unchanged. Through the decades, the same comfortable furniture, family photos, chronicling our growth from awkward school pictures to graduation portraits, and the hardware store memorabilia my father couldn't bear to part with after retirement. "There he is," my father called from his recliner, remote control in hand, as he paused the pregame show. At 68, Harold Wilson remained robust and energetic, his handshake still firm enough to make younger men wince. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Just in time, dear. Abigail's already here, and Mason texted he's running 15 minutes late." In the kitchen, Abigail was animatedly helping with dinner preparations while simultaneously describing her startup's latest developments. At 34, she radiated confidence, her designer outfit and perfectly styled hair projecting the successful entrepreneur image she cultivated carefully. "Brent," she exclaimed, giving me a quick hug, "you should see our new office space. We just leased the entire 15th floor on Michigan Avenue. The views are incredible." "That sounds impressive," I replied genuinely. Despite our differences, I wanted her to succeed. "How's the funding round going?" Her eyes lit up. "Actually, that's my big news tonight. We got word Friday that a major investment fund is seriously considering coming in as lead investor. $150 million. She lowered her voice dramatically. "I can't say which one yet, confidentiality agreements and all, but it's huge in the tech space." I froze momentarily, a chill running through me. Our firm had only 5 investment funds of exactly that size, and only one was currently evaluating lifestyle technology platforms. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet perfectly aligned with the universe's sense of irony. "That's significant funding," I managed. "Congratulations." Dinner proceeded with Abigail dominating the conversation, describing expansion plans, hiring projections, and potential international markets. My parents hung on every word, pride evident in their expressions. Mason arrived, apologizing for his lateness, while juggling teaching responsibilities and his 2-year-old daughter's cold. "So what about you, Brent?" my mother eventually asked during a rare pause in Abigail's monologue. "How's your online work going?" Before I could respond with my usual vague assurance, Abigail chimed in with a laugh. "Still playing around with your little website investments." I took a sip of water, maintaining my composure. "It keeps me busy." "You know," Abigail continued, setting down her fork with the authority of someone about to deliver valuable wisdom, "you should really stop playing pretend entrepreneur, Brent. These little online things aren't real businesses." The table grew quiet. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably while my mother glanced between us. "What I mean," Abigail continued, oblivious to the tension, "is that real businesses have infrastructure, employees, physical presence, not just clicking around online making small trades." Mason attempted to change the subject, but Abigail was on a roll, years of unexamined assumptions pouring out. "I could help you, you know. Once we secure this investment, I'll need someone to manage our smaller digital assets. Nothing major, but it would give you a foot in the door of an actual growing company." My father chuckled, relieving the tension. "That's nice of you to offer, sweetheart." "It really is," my mother agreed. "Brent could use some direction, couldn't he?" The family laughed collectively, a warm sound, normally, but in this moment each chuckle felt like a small laceration. 12 years of building my company, making investment decisions that shaped entire industries, mentoring dozens of successful entrepreneurs, all reduced to a punchline about my need for direction in the real business world. I could have spoken up, pulled out my phone and shown them our company website with my name as founder and CEO, mentioned the Fortune article from last year profiling our investment strategy, described our downtown office where 60 professionals managed billions in assets. Instead, I nodded quietly and said, "Understood." The conversation moved on, but I remained silent, observing Abigail with new perspective. Her description of her business model revealed fundamental flaws that no serious investor would overlook, unless they were deliberately overlooked for reasons I couldn't yet comprehend. Her market analysis contradicted current trends. Her technical claims demonstrated misunderstanding of the very technology her platform supposedly leveraged. After helping with dishes, I excused myself earlier than usual, citing work preparation for Monday. As I hugged my parents goodbye, I felt a strange resolve replacing my hurt feelings. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong or right. This was about professional integrity in a situation that had suddenly become far more complicated than family dinner dynamics. In my car, I made a hands-free call to my assistant. "Thomas, I need the complete file on Lifestyle Connect Technologies on my desk first thing tomorrow. And schedule an emergency review with the investment committee for 9 a.m. The professional world Abigail thought I was playing at was about to intersect with her reality in ways none of us had anticipated. Monday morning arrived with the crisp certainty of autumn fully established. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse office on the 32nd floor, watching Chicago awaken 40 stories below. The early sunlight glinted off Lake Michigan to the east and illuminated the sprawling cityscape where thousands of businesses were starting their week, including one particular startup that occupied my thoughts. Wilson Tech Partners occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek downtown tower. Founded 12 years ago with my initial investments and a vision for supporting sustainable technology, it had grown into one of the Midwest's most respected investment firms, with a portfolio exceeding $15 billion. Our specialty was identifying genuinely innovative tech companies with solid fundamentals, not just flashy concepts built on hype. Thomas, my chief operations director, entered after a brief knock, carrying a leather portfolio. At 42, he'd been with me since nearly the beginning, one of the few people who knew about my family's perception of my career. "The Lifestyle Connect Tech file is requested," he said, placing it on my desk. "And the investment committee is confirmed for 9. Daniel and Rachel will join us as well." Daniel Chen, my CFO, and Rachel Goldberg, our legal counsel, completed my core leadership team. Both were exceptional at their roles and unfailingly discreet. Essential qualities given the sensitive nature of today's discussion. I hadn't always planned on keeping my success private from my family. In the early days working from a converted bedroom in my apartment, I assumed they'd eventually come to understand and respect my career choice as the business grew. But each small victory, our first $1 million investment deal, moving into proper offices, hiring our 10th employee, was met with the same well-meaning but dismissive responses. "That's nice, dear, but when are you going to get a proper job with benefits?" my mother would ask. These internet bubbles always burst. Eventually, my father would warn. Rather than continually defending my choices, I gradually stopped sharing details. The business grew exponentially, and the disconnect between my family's perception and reality widened into an unbridgeable chasm. After a while, correcting their misconceptions seemed more disruptive than allowing them to continue. My office door opened again as Daniel and Rachel entered for our preliminary meeting. "I've reviewed the Lifestyle Connect proposal overnight." Daniel began adjusting his glasses. "Their financials don't align with their projections. The user acquisition costs alone would exceed their operational budget within 8 months. Rachel nodded in agreement. "And there are concerning discrepancies in their technical patents. Their claimed proprietary technology appears to be largely repackaged open-source solutions with minimal original development." I opened the file Thomas had delivered, though I already suspected what I'd find. Our research team had compiled a comprehensive analysis of Abigail's company, unaware of my personal connection. Their assessment was thorough and damning. Inflated user metrics, unsustainable cost structure, technical claims that couldn't be verified, and a market already saturated with similar solutions. "What confuses me," I said, "is how they advanced to final consideration for the emerging tech fund investment in the first place." Daniel looked uncomfortable. "The initial recommendation came through Gordon's network. He was quite insistent we fast-track the evaluation. Gordon Williams, our board chairman, rarely involved himself in specific investment decisions. His sudden interest in this particular company raised questions I hadn't considered during yesterday's family dinner. The most concerning element, Rachel added, is their claim about proprietary algorithms. We can't find any evidence they exist as described. If we invest based on these claims, and they prove false, we'd be potentially complicit in misleading our own investors, I finished her thought. Thomas, who had been silently observing, spoke up. There's something else. The company recently hired Patricia Williams as Chief Marketing Officer. Any relation to Gordon, I asked, though I already suspected the answer. His daughter Thomas confirmed. Recent MBA graduate with limited industry experience. The pieces fell into place with disappointing clarity. Gordon's enthusiasm for Lifestyle Connect wasn't about the business fundamentals but family connections. The very thing I had studiously avoided in my professional life. I was now facing an impossible situation. My sister's company was fundamentally unsound, as an investment yet poised to receive $150 million from my fund through what appeared to be preferential treatment. My professional integrity demanded action, but that action would inevitably impact my family. We need to approach this exactly as we would any other investment decision, I finally said. Objective analysis, due diligence, and recommendation based solely on business fundamentals. Daniel nodded. The numbers don't support this investment, not even close. And the legal risks are substantial, Rachel added, especially with these technology claims. I turned back to the window, watching the city fully awaken into Monday morning activity. 12 years of building my reputation on integrity and sound business judgment had led to this moment of decision between professional ethics and family harmony. Prepare the full assessment for the investment committee, I instructed. I'll draft the recommendation email myself. As my team left to prepare for the 9 o'clock meeting, I sat at my desk, the weight of the decision settling across my shoulders. I opened my laptop and began typing the email that would alter multiple trajectories. Subject: recommendation to withdraw funding from Lifestyle Connect Technologies. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, my family had dismissed my little online thing as insignificant. Now that very thing was about to make one of the most significant decisions affecting their lives, and they didn't even know it yet. The solitude of my office provided little comfort as I stared at my computer screen cursor blinking at the end of the subject line. Each keystroke that followed would set in motion consequences, extending far beyond business metrics. I began typing. After thorough analysis of Lifestyle Connect Technologies' business model, technical claims, and market positioning and financial projections, I recommend immediate withdrawal of our preliminary funding commitment of $150 million from the Emerging Tech Fund allocation. The words appeared clinical and detached on screen, betraying nothing of the family dinner less than 24 hours earlier, where I'd sat silently as my sister dismissed my career. This wasn't about revenge. I took no satisfaction in the recommendation. Professional integrity demanded separation of personal feelings from investment decisions. I continued detailing specific concerns: user acquisition costs, exceeding industry standards by 300%, technical patents that appeared to repackage existing solutions, market saturation indicators, and leadership experience, gaps in key areas. Each point was substantiated by our research team's findings, all conducted before I'd made the connection to Abigail's company. The document expanded to 4 pages of dispassionate analysis. Nothing in it reflected personal bias. Every concern would apply equally to any potential investment. Yet I couldn't ignore the knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't some anonymous founder I'd never meet. This was my sister, whose childhood bedroom had been across the hall from mine for 18 years. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Thomas entered with fresh coffee and additional documents. I've compiled the patent analysis from legal and the competitive landscape assessment, he said, placing them on my desk. And Gordon called. He's asking about the status of the Lifestyle Connect decision. What did you tell him? That you're conducting final due diligence before the investment committee meeting. I nodded, appreciating Thomas's discretion. Did he seem particularly interested? Thomas hesitated, more than usual for an individual investment decision. He mentioned hoping for a positive outcome before the end of the week. The pressure was building from multiple directions. I turned back to the email, reviewing it once more for any language that might suggest personal motivation, finding none. I added the final paragraph. While the company shows potential in concept, fundamental flaws in execution strategy, and questionable technical assets, make this an unsuitable investment for our fund at this time. I recommend communicating our withdrawal before the next scheduled payment to minimize disruption to all parties. My finger hovered over the send button. One click would set everything in motion, a business decision with deeply personal ramifications. I thought about Abigail's excitement at the dinner table, my parents' pride in her accomplishments, and the inevitable fallout when funding disappeared. Then I remembered my responsibility to our investors who trusted our firm with billions of dollars, people who believed in our commitment to thorough analysis and sound judgment. Retirement accounts, college funds, and family legacies depended on our integrity. I clicked send. The email disappeared into the corporate system, copying the investment committee and board members. Within seconds, my phone rang. Gordon Williams. Brent got a minute. His voice carried its usual authoritative tone. At 64, Gordon had built and sold 3 successful companies before joining our board, bringing valuable experience and connections. Of course, Gordon. I was just about to call you. Great timing. I wanted to check on the Lifestyle Connect decision. Patricia mentioned they're eager to finalize things this week. I took a deep breath. I've just sent my recommendation to the committee. I can't support this investment, Gordon. The fundamentals don't align with our criteria. Silence filled the line before he responded with careful neutrality. I see. That's unexpected. The preliminary assessment seemed positive. The detailed analysis revealed significant concerns. I've outlined them for the committee to review. Perhaps we should discuss this before the meeting. I have some additional context that might not have been considered. I'd welcome any relevant information. I replied, maintaining professional calm, but it would need to address the specific business fundamentals outlined in my assessment. Let's continue this conversation in person. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for noon. This investment deserves full discussion. The call ended before I could respond. Gordon's reaction confirmed my suspicion about his personal interest in this deal. The professional boundaries I'd maintained for years were about to be tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. Daniel entered my office holding his tablet with my email displayed. I just saw your recommendation. The numbers support your position completely, but Gordon won't be happy. He's already not happy, I replied. Emergency board meeting at noon. Because of the family connection. His daughter. I shook my head. He doesn't know about my family connection yet. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. That will complicate things. Significantly, I agreed, but it doesn't change the business fundamentals. This investment would violate our fiduciary responsibility to our fund investors. What will you tell your sister? The question I'd been avoiding hung in the air between us. Abigail still had no idea that her brother's little online thing controlled the investment she was counting on. My professional and personal worlds were colliding at terminal velocity. First, we make the right business decision, I said firmly. Then I'll deal with the personal fallout. As my team gathered materials for the emergency board meeting, I stared out at the Chicago skyline buildings, stretching toward a cloudless blue sky. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Abigail was probably celebrating the imminent investment, unaware that her brother had just recommended pulling the financial foundation from beneath her company. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain. After today, nothing between us would ever be the same again. The boardroom on the top floor of our building offered panoramic views of Chicago, though nobody was admiring the scenery that day. By 11:55, all 9 board members had arrived, in unusual full attendance that signaled the perceived importance of this meeting. Leather portfolios, opened water glasses filled, and hushed conversations created a tension-filled atmosphere as I organized my presentation materials. Gordon Williams sat at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence accentuated by an unmistakable air of displeasure. To his right sat Victoria Hayes, former tech CEO, and our most technically knowledgeable board member, James Patterson, representing our largest institutional investors, sat to Gordon's left, already reviewing the financial documents my team had distributed. The remaining members filed in Rebecca Ling from our legal committee, Michael Okafor, our risk assessment specialist, twins Jonathan and Jennifer Wells from our founding investor group, Sophia Rodriguez, marketing strategist, and Eleanor Chang, financial analyst. Each brought unique expertise to our governance structure. At precisely noon, Gordon called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of his knuckles against the polished mahogany table. I've called this emergency session to discuss the recommendation to withdraw funding from Lifestyle Connect Technologies. He began, his tone measured but with underlying tension. Brent has raised concerns that he feels warrant immediate action. Brent, please present your assessment. All eyes turned to me as I stood. For 12 years, I'd built my reputation on dispassionate analysis and sound business judgment. That foundation would be tested today. Thank you, Gordon. As outlined in my email, several critical issues emerged during our final due diligence of Lifestyle Connect Technologies that make this an unsuitable investment for our emerging tech fund. For the next 20 minutes, I methodically presented our findings, supported by research, market analysis, and technical assessments. My team had prepared comprehensive slides showing the discrepancies between Lifestyle Connect's claims and verifiable reality, user acquisition projections that defied industry standards, technical patents that appeared substantially, derivative and market analysis that ignored significant competitive threats. Most concerning, I continued, is their claim of proprietary algorithmic technology that supposedly differentiates their platform. Our technical team found no evidence this technology exists as described, which raises serious questions about product viability. Victoria Hayes leaned forward. These technical claims are central to their valuation, if they're not substantiated. Exactly, I confirmed. We'd be investing in projected value that has no foundation in current reality. Gordon's expression had darkened progressively during my presentation. When I concluded, he cleared his throat with deliberate emphasis. While I appreciate the thoroughness, I believe you're missing important context. Lifestyle Connect's leadership team has relationships with key industry players that don't appear in standard analysis. Patricia Williams has personally secured verbal commitments from 3 major potential clients. The mention of his daughter by name brought uncomfortable glances around the table. Everyone recognized the conflict of interest, though no one addressed it directly. James Patterson spoke up. Verbal commitments don't offset these fundamental concerns. The user economics simply don't work with their current model. New businesses often require adjustment periods, Gordon countered. We've previously invested in companies with similar early challenges that became tremendously successful. Those companies had solid technological foundations, Victoria noted, studying the patent analysis. This appears to lack that fundamental strength. The discussion intensified, with Gordon defending the investment with increasing fervor, while other board members raised additional concerns based on my presentation. The professional discourse maintained its civility, but underlying currents of tension were evident to everyone present. There's another factor we should consider, Michael Okafor said carefully. Brent, do you have any personal connection to this company that might influence your recommendation? The question I'd been anticipating hung in the air. All eyes turned to me again, including Gordon's, now narrowed with sudden suspicion. Yes, I answered calmly. I learned yesterday that the founder of Lifestyle Connect is my sister. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Gordon's face registered shock, then anger. You have a direct family connection to the company you're recommending we drop, and you didn't disclose this until now. His voice carried accusation. This completely undermines your objectivity. I maintained my composure. On the contrary, I've been more thorough with this assessment precisely because of the personal connection. Every concern raised is substantiated by independent analysis from our team, conducted before I was aware of the connection. If anything, personal considerations would lead me to support this investment, not recommend against it. Rebecca Ling, our legal expert, spoke carefully. Brent's correct that the conflict of interest would normally pressure him toward approval, not rejection. His recommendation against his sister's company suggests the concerns must be significant. Or personal, Gordon suggested. Family relationships can be complicated, which is exactly why I've focused exclusively on business fundamentals, I responded. Every point in my recommendation is supported by objective data. I'd make the same recommendation regardless of who founded the company. Eleanor Chang, who had been silently reviewing the financials, finally spoke. Gordon, I understand your daughter's involvement creates personal interest, but these numbers are deeply concerning. The burn rate alone would exhaust our investment within 14 months, with no clear path to profitability. Gordon's expression hardened at the direct reference to his own conflict of interest. The room fell silent as the twin issues of our personal connections hung in the balance against the weight of financial responsibility. After several uncomfortable moments, James Patterson broke the tension. I move we vote on the recommendation to withdraw funding based solely on business fundamentals. Whatever personal connections exist on either side, our primary responsibility is to our investors. The motion was seconded, and Gordon had no choice but to call the vote. One by one, board members registered their positions. When the tally was complete, the result was clear 8-1 in favor of withdrawing the investment, with only Gordon dissenting. The motion carries, Gordon announced tersely. Brent, prepare the appropriate communications to Lifestyle Connect regarding our decision. There's one more thing, I said, as the meeting prepared to adjourn. Given my personal connection, I believe I should deliver this news directly. It would be unprofessional to hide behind formal communications in this situation. Gordon studied me carefully before responding. Can you separate your professional and personal roles effectively in that conversation? Yes, I answered without hesitation. I've been doing it my entire career. The meeting adjourned with tension still thick in the air. As board members filed out, Victoria paused beside me. That couldn't have been easy, she said quietly. But it was the right call. I nodded in appreciation, gathering my materials, while contemplating the far more difficult conversation that lay ahead. The board meeting had been merely the professional hurdle. The personal one would prove far more challenging. The headquarters of Lifestyle Connect Technologies occupied half of the 15th floor in a recently renovated building on Michigan Avenue. The reception area featured sleek furniture, motivational phrases on the walls, and a logo that had cost some design firm far too much money. It projected exactly the image of a promising tech startup that Abigail had described at countless family dinners. I have an appointment with Abigail Wilson, I told the receptionist, who smiled professionally while tapping at her keyboard. Mr. Wilson. Yes, Miss Wilson is expecting you. She mentioned you're from the investment group. That's correct. She's very excited about your visit. I'll let her know you're here. The receptionist's words carried unintended weight. Excitement would soon transform into something very different. I straightened my tie and mentally rehearsed the careful separation between professional assessment and personal connection that this conversation would require. Moments later, Abigail emerged from a glass-walled conference room, beaming with anticipation. Her designer suit and confident stride projected the successful entrepreneur image she'd worked so hard to cultivate. Brent. She stopped abruptly, confusion replacing her professional smile. What are you doing here? I'm here regarding your investment funding, I replied evenly. We should talk privately. Her confusion deepened. You're with Everest Capital Partners. She named the shell company our firm used for certain investments, maintaining anonymity for both parties until final agreements. In a manner of speaking. Is there somewhere we can talk? Still visibly puzzled, she led me to her office, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furnishings that screamed successful startup founder in every detail. Wait here, she said. I need to get my co-founders for this discussion. She returned moments later with two men I recognized from our research. Justin Reynolds, the technical co-founder with a background in app development, and Marcus Greenfield, their operations director who had previously worked for a food delivery startup. This is my brother, Brent. Abigail explained to them, still looking confused. Apparently he's connected to Everest Capital somehow. Justin extended his hand. Great to meet you. Abigail mentioned you work in online investments. Are you consulting for Everest on this deal? Before I could answer, Abigail interjected with a nervous laugh. Brent has a small online investment business. Nothing at the scale of what we're discussing with Everest. The moment had arrived sooner than I'd anticipated. Actually, I'm here representing Wilson Tech Partners. We operate Everest Capital as a subsidiary for certain investments. The room fell silent. Marcus looked between Abigail and me with growing understanding while Justin remained confused. Wilson. Tech Partners, Abigail repeated slowly. I don't understand. Wilson Tech Partners is my investment firm. We manage $15 billion in technology investments, including the $150 million fund that was considering investing in Lifestyle Connect. The color drained from Abigail's face as comprehension dawned. Your little online thing is Wilson Tech Partners. I nodded, maintaining professional composure, despite the personal earthquake occurring in the room. Yes, and I'm here because after thorough review, our board has decided to withdraw the investment offer. Justin collapsed into a chair. Withdraw? But we're already spending against that commitment. We've leased this space, hired 20 new people. Based on a preliminary commitment that was subject to final due diligence, I clarified, which revealed several concerning issues. Abigail's shock was transforming rapidly into anger. This is because of what I said at dinner, isn't it? You're punishing me for not taking your online work seriously. This has nothing to do with personal feelings, I replied firmly. Our technical assessment found that your proprietary algorithm claims aren't substantiated by your actual technology. Your user acquisition projections exceed industry standards by 300% with no clear strategy to achieve them. And your current burn rate would exhaust our investment within 14 months. Marcus winced at each point, suggesting he'd had similar concerns internally. Justin looked increasingly uncomfortable while Abigail's anger intensified. So you've been spying on our company, using your position to get insider information. Standard due diligence, I corrected. The same process we apply to every potential investment. I didn't even know your company was seeking our funding until you mentioned the amount at family dinner, which matched one of our active consideration funds. Wait, Justin interrupted. Your brother is the CEO of Wilson Tech Partners. The Wilson Tech Partners. He turned to Abigail accusingly. You said your brother had a small online investment hobby. That's what he always told us. Abigail shouted, her professional facade crumbling entirely. He never mentioned building some billion-dollar investment firm. $15 billion in managed assets, I corrected, automatically, immediately regretting the precision. But that's not relevant to the current discussion. Abigail slammed her hand on the desk. Not relevant. You've been sitting at family dinners for years, listening to me talk about my business, knowing you controlled this kind of investment power, and never said a word. I keep my professional and personal lives separate. Clearly, her voice cracked with emotion. So separate that you'll pull funding from your own sister's company without a second thought. The decision was made by our board after reviewing the business fundamentals, I explained calmly. 8-1 vote. I abstained from the final decision due to conflict of interest. Marcus, who had been quiet, finally spoke. What specific concerns led to this decision? In detail, please. I spent the next 15 minutes outlining the technical, financial, and market concerns our team had identified. Justin grew increasingly uncomfortable as I detailed the technical deficiencies while Marcus took extensive notes. Abigail alternated between angry outbursts and stunned silence. So that's it, she finally said when I concluded. You're just pulling $150 million, knowing it will probably kill our company. The funding was never finalized, I reminded her, and these issues would have been identified by any thorough investor. But other investors would have given us a chance to address them, Justin argued, not just pulled the rug out without warning. I considered this point carefully. You're right. Typically, we would provide feedback for correction if the fundamentals were sound, but execution needed adjustment. In this case, however, the board felt the gap between current reality and stated capabilities was too significant to bridge within a reasonable time frame. Abigail laughed bitterly. You know what's ironic? I spent years thinking you needed my help to succeed in business. All those times I tried to introduce you to real business contacts or explain how things work outside your computer screen. Her voice trailed off, tears forming despite her obvious effort to maintain composure. The moment struck deeper than I'd anticipated. For years I'd compartmentalized her condescension as merely uninformed. Seeing her confront the reality was unexpectedly painful for both of us. "You never asked what I actually did," I said quietly. "You assumed. Because you never corrected anyone. Mom and Dad still think you work alone in some apartment, struggling to make ends meet with your online investments. That was my choice. I didn't want my success to change family dynamics." "Well, congratulations," she said bitterly. "You've changed them permanently now." Marcus cleared his throat. "If I may, what would make this investment viable from your perspective? Assuming we could address these concerns." The question shifted the conversation back to professional territory, which I welcomed. Substantive technical development to match your claims. Realistic user acquisition strategy. Reduced burn rate and extended runway. But most importantly, honest assessment of your current capabilities versus your marketing claims. Justin nodded slowly. "The technical issues. They're legitimate concerns. We've been pushing the marketing ahead of development capabilities." Justin Abigail snapped. "Don't validate his excuses." "They're not excuses, they're business fundamentals," Marcus said quietly. "And he's right about most of them." He turned to me. "Would you consider an adjusted investment with restructured terms if we address these issues?" This was exactly the type of practical question I'd hoped to hear. "I can't make promises, but we could potentially reevaluate a revised business plan that addresses these fundamental concerns. It would need to start with a realistic assessment of your current technical capabilities." Abigail stood abruptly. "I need a minute." She left the office, the door closing firmly behind her. In her absence, Justin and Marcus began asking detailed questions about specific concerns, making notes, and occasionally exchanging knowing glances that suggested they'd harbored similar doubts internally. "She's been pushing us to accelerate everything," Justin admitted quietly. "Marketing, hiring office space. I've been saying for months that our tech isn't where she's claiming it is in investor presentations. That's a dangerous gap to maintain," I advised professionally, "especially with investment funds that conduct thorough technical due diligence." After 30 minutes of substantive discussion, Abigail returned, her eyes red, but her composure restored. The conversation continued with more pragmatic focus, though the personal tension remained unresolved beneath the surface. When our meeting concluded, Marcus and Justin left, first giving Abigail and me a moment alone. The silence between us carried the weight of years of misunderstanding and the fresh wound of today's revelations. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she finally asked, her voice smaller than I'd heard it since childhood. "All these years watching me struggle to build something, and you had this whole empire." "Would it have helped?" I asked, genuinely. "Or would it have just created a different kind of comparison and competition between us?" She had no answer for that, and perhaps there wasn't one. Years of family dynamics couldn't be untangled in a single conversation. "What do I tell Mom and Dad?" she asked. "About the company, about you." "That's your choice," I replied. "I've never asked anyone to keep my success secret. I just didn't volunteer the information." As I left the building, stepping into the autumn afternoon, I felt strangely unburdened despite the conflict. The carefully maintained wall between my personal and professional lives had crumbled, but perhaps that wasn't entirely negative. The truth, however, uncomfortable, created possibility for more authentic relationships than years of misunderstandings had permitted. The next family dinner would certainly be interesting. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' home with an unusual sensation of uncertainty. After 12 years of carefully scripted family dinner conversations, I had no plan for navigating this new reality. The familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood seemed somehow different, as though the fundamental shift in family dynamics had altered even the physical landscape. When I arrived, only my parents' cars occupied the driveway. No sign of Mason's sedan or Abigail's luxury SUV. I checked my watch. 10 minutes past our usual gathering time. In 20 years of monthly dinners, I could count on one hand the times Abigail had arrived later than precisely on schedule. My mother greeted me at the door, her hug lingering a moment longer than usual. "Brent, come in. Dad's watching the game." The living room felt emptier than usual, my father alone in his recliner rather than arguing football statistics with Mason. "Where is everyone?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. My mother busied herself arranging appetizers that nobody would eat. Mason called. "Emma has a fever, so they're staying home. And Abigail." She paused, glancing toward my father. "Abigail said she couldn't make it tonight." The careful neutrality in her tone confirmed my suspicion. Abigail had told them something about the investment withdrawal, though clearly not everything. My father muted the television, an unprecedented action during a Bears game. "Son, is there something going on between you and your sister? She called yesterday quite upset about some business situation involving you." I took a seat across from him, deciding that after years of comfortable omissions, complete honesty was the only path forward. "What exactly did she tell you?" My mother joined us, perching on the arm of my father's chair. "Just that her company's funding fell through and that you were somehow involved. She was emotional. Didn't give many details." I nodded, appreciating that Abigail had left the full explanation to me. "I need to tell you something that I should have shared years ago." Over the next hour, I explained everything. The investment firm I'd built while they thought I was playing around online. The billions in assets we managed. The respected position we held in the technology investment world. And finally, the impossible coincidence of Abigail's company seeking funding from my firm. My parents listened in stunned silence, their expressions cycling through disbelief, confusion, pride, and hurt. $15 billion, my father finally repeated. "Your company manages $15 billion in investments." I nodded. "And you've been running this since right after college? All those years when we thought you were just—" My mother couldn't finish the sentence. "Why didn't you tell us?" My father's question carried no accusation, only genuine bewilderment. I considered my answer carefully. At first, it was because I wanted to prove myself before saying anything. Then, when the business started succeeding, I worried that it would change how we related to each other. And eventually, it just seemed easier to maintain the separation between my professional and personal lives. "But we're your family," my mother said softly. "Did you think we wouldn't be proud of you?" "I knew you'd be proud, but I also knew it would change everything. How you see me, how Abigail and I interact, the advice and expectations." My father leaned forward. "And now this situation with your sister's company?" I explained the investment committee's concerns about Lifestyle Connect's business model, the board vote, and my painful meeting with Abigail. My parents exchanged looks I couldn't quite interpret. "So her business might fail because of this?" my mother asked. "It might adjust and survive, or it might fail. That depends on how they respond to legitimate business concerns that any serious investor would have identified. The technology they're claiming doesn't match what they've actually built." My father nodded slowly, processing this information. "You know, when Abigail started this company, I worried she was moving too fast. All these big claims and fancy offices before they'd really built anything solid." This admission surprised me. My father had seemed nothing but supportive at family dinners. "You never said anything." "What father wants to question his daughter's dreams?" he replied. "Besides, I don't understand all this tech business. I figured she knew what she was doing." We talked through dinner, decades of assumptions and misunderstandings gradually untangling. My parents shared their own anxieties about my career path that they'd hidden behind questions about real jobs. I explained the deliberate choices I'd made to build a sustainable business rather than chase quick growth. The evening ended with a new understanding, though the absence of Abigail and Mason left the resolution feeling incomplete. As I prepared to leave, my father placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm proud of what you've built, son. Not because of the money, but because you did it with integrity. That's what matters in the end." The weeks that followed were challenging. Family group texts fell silent. Mason eventually broke the ice, requesting a private meeting where I explained everything. His reaction mixed astonishment with pragmatic acceptance. "So you're secretly a billionaire," he summarized with typical directness. "The company is valued at billions. That's different from personal wealth." He shrugged. Still pretty wild that you kept it quiet all these years. Makes me wonder what else I don't know about my siblings. 3 weeks after the confrontation, an email arrived from Abigail. Can we talk coffee at Lakefront Cafe Tuesday 2 p.m.? The cafe offered neutral territory busy enough for privacy in a public setting. Abigail arrived precisely on time, her appearance more subdued than her usual polished perfection. We exchanged awkward greetings before settling at a corner table. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began, stirring her coffee without drinking it. About the company. About us. About why you kept your success secret all these years. I waited, giving her space to continue. Justin and Marcus convinced me to really look at the issues your team identified. She sighed. They were right. You were right. We've been marketing capabilities we haven't actually built yet, hoping we could catch up once we had the funding. That's a common mistake in startups, I offered. Optimism is necessary, but it has to be grounded in achievable reality. She nodded. We've spent the last few weeks restructuring everything. Scaled back the office space. Let go of the marketing team we'd hired prematurely. Justin is refocusing on building the actual technology we need before we claim to have it. That's a solid approach. I was angry at you, she admitted, but I was more angry at myself. For years I've been dismissing what you do while secretly feeling like I needed to prove myself. When you revealed your success, it felt like you'd been letting me make a fool of myself all this time. That was never my intention, I said sincerely. I compartmentalized to avoid exactly this kind of comparison between us. I understand that now. She met my eyes directly. I've been thinking about what you said, that I never actually asked what you did. You're right. I assumed and projected instead of being curious about my own brother's life. The conversation shifted to deeper waters. Our childhood competitive dynamic, our different approaches to validation and success, the unintended consequences of our parents' well-meaning encouragement. I'd like to start over, Abigail finally said, both personally and professionally. Would you be willing to look at our revised business plan once we've addressed the fundamental issues? Of course, and I can recommend other potential investors if our fund isn't the right fit. I'd also like your honest feedback, not as a potential investor, but as someone who's built what I'm trying to build. No sugarcoating because we're family. This request, perhaps more than anything else, signaled a genuine shift in our relationship. For the first time, Abigail was seeking my input, rather than trying to provide guidance I hadn't requested. I'd be happy to. The following months brought gradual healing and unexpected growth. Mason organized a family dinner where we all spoke more honestly than we had in years. My parents visited my office for the first time, my father asking thoughtful questions about the business, while my mother simply said, "I wish you'd shown us this part of your life sooner." Abigail and her team rebuilt their business from more solid foundations. The proprietary technology they'd claimed in marketing materials became an actual development priority rather than an aspirational description. 6 months later, they secured modest but appropriate funding from a different investment group with realistic terms and expectations. Our professional relationship developed boundaries and respect that our personal connection had sometimes lacked. She began consulting me on strategic decisions, while I learned to offer guidance without taking control, a balance we'd never quite managed in childhood games. At a family dinner, almost a year after the confrontation, I watched Abigail describing her company's adjusted growth plans with realistic enthusiasm rather than exaggerated claims. My parents asked engaged questions about both our businesses, no longer filtering everything through their hardware store experience. Mason contributed his educator's perspective on our different approaches. The dinner represented everything I'd feared would be lost if my professional success became known to my family, and everything I'd never realized might be gained through transparency. The carefully maintained walls between personal and professional had not protected family harmony as I'd believed. They'd merely prevented authentic connection. Success isn't measured by impressive offices or investment figures, but by the integrity with which we navigate difficult choices and the courage to be authentic even when it's uncomfortable. The relationships worth having are those that survive honesty, not those maintained through comfortable illusions. After all, the most valuable investments aren't found in technology portfolios, but in the people who challenge us to grow beyond our comfortable patterns. Sometimes family does this purposefully, sometimes accidentally, but always with the potential for transformation if we're willing to embrace uncomfortable truths. What assumptions might you be making about those closest to you? What parts of yourself are you hiding for comfort rather than sharing for growth? Whether in business or family, the foundations of lasting success are built on authenticity, even when that means acknowledging uncomfortable realities. Like, subscribe, and share if this story resonated with you, and comment below with a time when being honest changed an important relationship in your life. Thank you for listening to my journey from pretend to authenticity. Sometimes the quiet ones have the most to teach us if only we'd ask the right questions.